Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to our panel, Race for an Audience, Media in the Middle East. My name is Caroline Drees. I'm Reuters editor for the Middle East, based in Dubai, and I'll be hosting the panel this morning. My apologies in advance to everyone sitting behind me, so I'm going to try not to neglect you. The media scene in the Middle East has changed dramatically over the past 10 to 15 years. The last time I lived in the Gulf, which was in the early to mid-90s, Al Jazeera didn't even exist. There were few broadcast outlets, state-run, with a bland diet of predictable content. Viewers really had no choice. Since then, there's been a real watershed that we've crossed. And there's been a regional media boom far beyond Al Jazeera, including a lot of different channels like Arabiya, CNBC Arabiya, and many, many others, providing fierce competition and an enormous amount of choice for the viewers. New voices are being heard, new images are being shown, and a new era for media in the Middle East has truly begun. Today, our distinguished panel is going to discuss and debate some of the challenges that this media proliferation and race for an audience brings with it. Allow me to introduce the panel. Let me start with Mona AbuSulayman. Mona is the executive director of the Prince Alwaleed bin Talal Kingdom Foundation. In that capacity, she leads regional and international philanthropy initiatives for Prince Alwaleed. Mona is also a media and television personality. She has co-hosted a leading TV program on MBC. She's also editor-in-chief, I hope this is up to date, of the Arabic edition of the weekly Madame Figaro magazine. And Mona is also a UN Goodwill Ambassador. Welcome, Mona. We also have with us Mr. Zafar Siddiqi, who is the chairman of CNBC Arabiya. Mr. Siddiqi is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales and worked for KPMG for 18 years, initially as a partner, and later as the managing director of one of its consultancy practices. Zafar, having extensive experience in the Middle East and South Asia, left that profession in 1996 and established a television production company. Today, Zafar is chairman of CNBC Africa, chairman of CNBC Arabiya, president of CNBC Pakistan, chairman of Sama TV, and chairman of Murdoch University International Studies Center in Dubai. I'd also like to welcome Raja Trad. Raja is the chief executive office of the Leo Burnett Group Mediterranean and is a member of the Leo Burnett Worldwide Global Leadership Council. Raja manages the Leo Burnett Group of Companies Middle East and North Africa, a communications network headquartered in Dubai with offices across the Middle East. Raja is also on the board of trustees of the American University in Beirut and is an active board member of Dubai Media Incorporated. Born and raised in Beirut, Raja received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Studies and Public Administration from the American University of Beirut, and I'm not going to mention the year. We also have with us today Mr. Marwan Muasher, the Senior Vice President of External Affairs at the World Bank. Marwan began his career as a journalist for the Jordan Times. He later served as press advisor to the Prime Minister and then ran the Jordan Information Bureau in Washington. In 1995, Marwan opened Jordan's first embassy in Israel, then served as Minister of Information, and then as Jordan's ambassador to the United States. He returned to Jordan to serve as foreign minister and then deputy prime minister and joined the World Bank in 2007. And last but not least, we have Nakhle Hage, the director of news and current affairs at Arabiya news channel. Hage joined NBC Group in 1991 in London as chief sub-editor of news. And at the inception of Arabiya, he established the Department of Current Affairs and was responsible for the launching of 15 different programs. In July 2004, he became Director of News and Current Affairs. Before joining NBC Group, Hage started his career, or actually I'm going to call you Nakhle, started your career in radio as an editor and presenter for Voice of Lebanon. He later moved to television programming as a reporter for Télé Liban, covering the Lebanese war. Welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome to the debate. Let us start off today with a simple question. I think I'll start with you, Nakhle, I had you last before, to ask you, has the proliferation of news media in the Middle East led to a lowering of journalistic standards?
Thanks, Caroline. Let me first, if you allow me, to comment on your introduction, since you said that sort of media revolution in the Middle East started about 10 or 13 years ago when Al Jazeera was launched. Unfortunately, in the West, people know the Arab media through the eyes of Bin Laden, or see Bin Laden through the eyes of Arab media. The fact of the matter is MBC was launched in 1991, and it was the proper revolution in the Arab media. And I believe people in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Oman, especially in the Gulf, felt the difference of the Arab media when the first private sector television network was launched. Now, if we talk about the level or standard of the Arab media because of competition, I can say that competition is always healthy, and competition should challenge us to do a better job. And since we should respect our audience, we should compete to give them better product instead of lowering the standard of our message or product given to them. But unfortunately, in this part of the world, media is different than the rest of the world. And I can give you some figures about this. We have over 400 satellite channels, and we have a small amount of money spent on advertising. It is almost $800 million a year. So you can tell that if you distribute this amount of money over 400 channels, it is you will be spending $2 million a year on each channel in average. And this is not realistic, because this is not even enough to fund probably the transmission cost, let alone the rest of operational cost. The problem here is that the media, or majority of the media in the Arab world, were not meant to be a business case to make money, to profit, to compete with the proper media production with each other. The problem is that majority of the media are financed by governments or political parties. I can tell you that a government, non-Arab government like Iran, is spending over $200 million a year on Arab media, on Al-Manar television, on some Iraqi television, on Al-Alam television, and on some radios and newspaper in Arabic language. I can tell you also that France 24, which is funded by the French government, is spending 80 million euro a year on almost Arab audience. BBC Arabic is spending lots of money also on the Arabic service. Al-Hurra, I think their budget is about $70 to $80 million a year, and they were running for the last 4 or 5 years. None of these channels or government funded channels are meant to promote the freedom of speech in this part of the world. None of these channels were meant to make money. They all want to, from my point of view, to spoil the Arab public opinion by their political messages. So you can imagine that Iran is spending tens of millions of dollars on Al-Manar television to promote freedom of speech.
Marwan, let me ask you, given what Nakhle is describing and given the proliferation of media, what is your impression of the standard of journalism in the region?
Well, I think the question implies that the proliferation of the media has lowered journalistic standards, and I have a problem with that premise because, like everything in life, nothing is black and white. The proliferation of the media is a fact. It's like globalization. You can't say I don't want to, I don't want to be part of it. You have to see how you deal with it rather than the opposite. But if you look at the proliferation of the media in the Arab world, and it goes, by the way, way beyond MBC and Al Jazeera and the satellite stations. We're talking about the electronic websites and the blogs and all the social media now that is happening in the Arab world to a great extent, and the weekly newspapers, etc. In general, I think the proliferation has been positive. Why? Because of the following issues. One, it has allowed better scrutiny of public officials in a way that has not been the case in the past. Even if that scrutiny is often done in a sensational manner, public officials in the Arab world today, in my opinion, think twice today than they used to 10 or 20 years ago before they do anything, because they know they're going to see it in the paper. And that is good, even if, as I said, sometimes it is done in a sensational way. The proliferation has also democratized the media in the Arab world in two main aspects. One, the production of information has been made cheaper. It is easy to put things on electronic websites. It is easy to come up with a satellite channel rather than the maybe hundreds of millions that you need to do otherwise. It has allowed instantaneous and unfiltered feedback from regular citizens. Now, on an electronic website, you know, if you read an article, you can also read with the article comments from regular citizens in a way that they could not have done so in the past. And so in an environment where the press is not free, and certainly the press in the Arab world is not free, you can now see instantaneous feedback from regular citizens about what is going on. Now, with that comes responsibilities that maybe need to be addressed more seriously and have not been addressed in the Arab world. One is journalistic ethics. Okay, in the developed world, there are ethics that are applied. No one, for example, in the developed world can write a story without checking with all sources. And if they don't check with all sources, that's a serious offense. That is, you know, that is not the case in the Arab world. And so training of journalists, ethics, if you send a news outlet a press release and you say this is embargoed until, you know, Thursday, and they publish it on Wednesday, this is a serious offense in the developed world. Here, it is not a serious offense. People do it all the time. So some training, basic training, and I'm not, of course, generalizing. I mean, there are people that do it, but not everybody. So some training of journalists is definitely needed, and libel laws are needed too. When you write about someone, you need to know that you can be sued if that information is not accurate. But the suing, the judge should be the court and not the state, as is often the case in the Arab world, where the state is the judge and the jury at the same time. If these two issues are addressed in a proper way, that is ethics and training and libel laws, I believe that we would have successfully addressed the challenges coming with proliferation. But can we say proliferation in itself is a negative phenomenon? Absolutely not.
Zafar, let me turn to you with your experience, CNBC in Africa, also in Pakistan and here. What differences do you see, what do you see unique to the Middle East in terms of journalistic standards, in terms of the training that Marwan referred to, in terms of the role of the state?
Well, you know, each market is different. Even within these markets, if you look at the Middle East as a region, I mean, you've got the Mashriq and the Maghreb and the GCC. And going back to your point about the proliferation of TV stations, I think it's been very positive for journalistic standards. And I think we've seen a substantial improvement. If you look at 1991, at the start of the Gulf War, when CNN was first beamed in, which was in all its freshness, something new to this region. And if you examine historically, since 1991, well, I didn't know NBC was established in 1991, but I think that was good, and although it was from Europe. After that, I think the game changer in this region, for whatever you may say about it, was Al Jazeera. You had these trained journalists, I think, who brought in a paradigm shift into the way news was reported. I'm not concerned about agendas here or ownership, but they provided that change. In these economic times at this moment, where the world is in deep recession and broadcasters face upward pressures in costs, I think finding an easy way out for media by lowering journalistic standards is a dangerous precedent to set. Audiences, as far as they are concerned, they are mature in this region, and they are very discerning. And what broadcasters face today is content, the look and feel of it, how you package it. That's one aspect of it. Sensationalization, I think, is a dangerous path forward. I think it's a very dangerous path forward, and one sees some of it in the Arab media. This haste to get in breaking news of whatever nature without checking facts and verifying stories. I think engaging the viewers is very critical, and I think that we see that happening as these stations move forward. And then you have changing demographics of this region. I think new media versus traditional media are aspects to be looked at. You mentioned blogs and other internet sites. I think social networks have had a substantial impact on the demographics as the younger viewers have moved to the social networks. And we heard from MTV Arabia. I thought that really would be a success in this region, but it hasn't. And I think all over the world, MTV has been impacted by the social networks. In summary, looking forward, and we will discuss this as we move forward, I believe that there is going to be consolidation in the media industry as we move forward. I think we need more improved measurement tools as far as audiences are concerned. And I think all this has been positive as far as journalistic standards are concerned, but we need more training institutes and schools of journalism. And most important, I think the point that you were referring to is the corporatization of media companies in this region.
Thank you very much. Let's look a little bit at the commercial angles that we've all raised and the commercial pressures that media organizations, specifically in the Middle East, are under, and the impact that advertisers can have on the content of particularly satellite broadcasters. Rajab, could you comment on to what extent corporate advertisers are having an influence on content, and who's more influential? Is it advertisers or is it states?
Let me start by saying I think it all depends on the agenda of each and every media. Some of the media or some of those channels are commercial channels, so they need the advertising revenue in order to survive. And some of them are there for another reason, for a political reason supported by a certain government or by a certain group. So it all depends what are we talking about. In my opinion, first of all, I don't think we will be able in any form or shape support 400 TV channels in the Middle East. I think consolidation is an absolute need for advertisers, for everybody, and for definitely the standards, because at the very end of the day, the name of this session is Race for an Audience. And definitely we cannot have the proper audience to support over 400 channels. So from an advertising point of view, number one, I mean, based on realities and based on experience and based on facts and figures, some of the corporate multinational clients prefer not to go for like polarizing TV stations. They prefer to keep away from sensational type of news, because at the very end of the day, they are behind one objective, which is to build a brand and to sell a product. And they do not want to be connected. They do not want to antagonize, in principle, they do not want to antagonize the public at large. So they tend to go more for entertainment rather than news. So this is the trend lately. So sometimes they go in entertainment, serials, whatever, films. I mean, they're trying to get away as much as possible from, as I said, polarizing news. And I think this has reflections, and despite all this, some of the news channels are still going strong. We know that they are losing money. So many of the TV channels are losing money. And at the end of the day, it's the call of the people who are supporting the channels. Now, when it comes to also advertisers, the most important thing for us that we have been talking about in this industry for the past 30 years is measurement. And we kept on talking about, especially when it comes to TV channels, talking about people meters. And it's the saga that we have been discussing time and again. Now, I was happy yesterday to hear from the gentleman, I don't know if he's with us here, Louis Hakim of Philips, who is heading the research committee representing the industry at large, is saying that they got to an initial agreement to launch people meters. If we have people meters, we will be able exactly to tell what the people want, because the ratings of the programs will determine how to spend our money. I mean, at the end, it's dear to our clients' hearts, and they want return on investment. It's not just advertising for the sake of advertising. They need to connect with the people. They need to reach the people. And at the end, I think also it's a responsibility of the channels to be connected with the people, to listen to the people. Because in my opinion, if they do not listen to the people, if they do not connect with the people, people will neither listen to them, nor they will connect with them. And at the end of the day, why the hell do you have this channel? I mean, if you do not want to create a sort of a connection and a dialogue with the people, I think sooner or later you're going to lose it, and you will not have the advertising revenue that you need to support the future. Now, one more thing when it comes to advertising. When you look at facts and figures and you discover, like in a place like Saudi Arabia, among the youth, they are spending more time with social media than with TV. I mean, the likes of YouTube, Facebook, and all the rest. It means something. It means maybe they are sick and tired of listening for more of the same all the time. So they escape and they go to new media. And this is, we are not realizing it. We have to understand it's not what it used to be. It's more of a, I like this, by the way, the session, it's reflective of what's happening, which is a 360-degree approach to advertising and communication. It's no more one way. People have the full control to decide where to go. It's not us that we will decide for them. They will decide where to go and what they want to listen to. So,
Mona, I'd like to ask you to pick up on that, the question of advertisers expecting a certain kind of product from the news media to be able to place the products in the right medium and the content that they want, the consumers of the media dictating what they want to see and the pressure that that has on the media. In your opinion, what needs to be done to ensure that the standards, the journalistic standards, don't suffer as we race to satisfy as many people in the public as possible and possibly therefore lower the standard to the lowest common denominator?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, the number 400 keeps being recycled. 400 channels, 400. Yes, we have 400 channels, but I think everybody knows that the top 10 take 90% of all viewers. So the other 390 are almost irrelevant. A lot of repetition occurs in these channels. A lot of them are just music videos that are being repeated, or different combinations of the same serials. So 400 isn't really a number that reflects what people watch. People do watch NBC, people do watch Al Jazeera, and I think what is going on is that a lot of people are realizing we have two segments. We have the youth, which everybody wants to cater to, and who don't really care about the news as news. They care about it in the way that it connects with them. And the news media outlets have not been able to do this. Facebook does. Facebook rallies you behind causes. Let's shut this site out, or against this person, or for this person, or for this cause. So there's a little bit more interactivity. But the other thing is that when I'm talking about myself, there's the news and there's the news talk shows. And for me to be able to know what I want to think about something, I can't just watch NBC. Jazeera maybe, but not just NBC or Arabiya. But usually I also have to add Al-Manar to the mix. I'm not Shia, but I have to add the Manar because that's a different point of view of what is happening in my region. a different interpretation. So for me to be able to have a more, not just comprehensive, but something that would make sense to me, I have to watch too many news channels, and I think that's a waste of time. I think within each channel there needs to be a little bit more reflection of the different points of view in a respectful manner, and that's not happening. That's what the journalistic standards that I would care about. Yes, we do have a problem with people who are not just checking their sources, but actually making up sources, and there is no liability. But then we have, and I'm not just talking about news, I'm talking about, you know, even magazines and newspapers, and this happened to me personally. But once you go into having the journalistic standards that is highly ethical, but also trying to be as diverse as possible within the same news channel, that's the news channel that's going to be number one, because you don't have to switch to find it. The other thing about ads, if it's only $800 million and it's divided between newspapers and magazines and channels, or is it just channels, TV? 800 only.
No, it's only for TV.
Yeah.
It's a little bit less than it.
A little bit less than $800 million. And of course the advertisers want to sell their product. But there's also the emotional connotation if you're watching a show, because it's, for example, Kalam Nawam, we don't have a problem with censorship. People keep talking about red lines. I've never been told by NBC ever that there's a red line. I've never been told don't say a certain thing. It might be cut in the editing if it's too controversial without us knowing, but I've never actually had any kind of direction on that, because Kalam Nawam has been able to discuss a lot of taboo and difficult issues for the Arab world through looking through the social lens. And we've never lost advertisers. I think advertisers are not going to say, we're not going to put a product for a certain subject. It's just, how will the subject connect with the audience? The negative feeling or the positive feeling that it brings about.
Let's talk a little bit about these journalistic standards and whose job it is to enforce them. Clearly, there's lots of players involved here. Nakhle, you look like you're ready to say something.
I'm the journalist. And you're talking about journalistic standards. I believe it is, unfortunately, it's very, very loose area here, because as my colleagues here on this panel confirmed before, that we don't have great journalistic school in this part of the world. We don't have proper regulation in this part of the world. We don't have proper accountability. And we are not, majority of media organizations are not after making money. They are more after spreading political message. So this standardization or this reliability, unfortunately, is very loose. However, there are two sources of investment here by any company or any news organization. We have the short-term investment in people. So we tell people what they want to hear, to listen. If they want to see pictures of massacres, we show them. If they want us to tell them that any Arab or Muslim killed in any part of the world, even if he or she are terrorists, are martyrs, also we can win that people. But this is only for short term. Arabiya, for example, decided to invest for the long term, to do the long term investment in the audience. And that's why we are having this reward by our audience. And according to the existing statistics that we have, our audience is growing up, because audience appreciate really good product. Audience appreciate good product. And the politicians try their best to intervene and manipulate the media. The politicians want the media to serve them, you know. The politicians want the media to serve them, and they are not one party, so they want to polarize the media. And the only way to skip this is to make a proper business called news industry.
Zafar, let me ask you about journalistic standards and whose job it is to enforce it. On the one hand, we're saying we want limited state involvement. On the other hand, the state is the one that has to implement libel laws. Where do you see the responsibility lies for ensuring that regulations are in place, either internal or external, to keep up the journalistic standards?
I think it's dangerous to suggest a regulatory framework as far as if there is government involved. I think the government's role in the region should be to provide an enabling environment for the broadcasters. Yes, you have the FCC in the US and you have the European, but I think in the Middle East, if the broadcasters were to get together, and I don't know, I can speak for CNBC, Arabiya, when I first established it. Ours was a different issue. The issue was that and perhaps it's applicable to news as well, that you had journalists in the print media reporting on business, but were only taking it off PR releases. And hence, what we were faced with was finding proper business journalists for our TV station. And I think overall, if one were to look at this transition from print and radio into television, and it's happened all over the world, but you have certain training grounds which did not exist, however, now do exist. I was very happy to hear that MBC is involved with the project in education. I have set one up in education. It's a university where we are committed to that. So, and I was very happy to learn about the Jordan Media Institute here in our host country. And I think these will happen. If you were to put a regulatory framework, my gut feeling tells me that it will not work. Governments will use that as a basis of getting their points of view across. So it's up to the broadcasters to look at that regulatory aspects amongst themselves. And I think it's also very important for news stations, and you were referring to the top 10. I agree with you that 90% of that is within the top 10. I think an external board of governors relevant to the editorial policy of TV stations is a good idea to start off with. And it's always best to get external people who from all walks of civil society. And so, in summary, I think the broadcaster's responsibility is to set the standards and to ensure some form of regulations. Secondly, to ensure external board of advisors on their editorial policies.
Can I add to it something,
Sure.
please? I think the regulators should be basically the viewers. Because at the very end of the day, they will either reward you or they will get away and don't listen to you. I agree that there should be self-regulation. And let's not, forget that, okay, we're talking about liberalism and we're talking about some of the news channels that came and started talking differently to the people over the past 5 years. But let's remember that there is still some regulation. Maybe not direct regulation, but there are some directional regulations, I would say.
Let me ask quickly about the audience. Is there a danger that if you're really only going for the ratings and what the audience decides they want to watch, that you run the risk of lowering the standards? It's probably always more fun to watch a burning house than a factual summary of GDP forecasts. Yeah. So given what you've just said, how can we ensure that journalistic standards don't suffer?
At the end, the standards, in my opinion, in any way, form, or shape you want to communicate with the people should be there. I don't think people would like to see the burning thing happening time and again. Maybe they will enjoy it the first time, maybe they will enjoy it the second time, but when it becomes the trend and the tone of the TV channel, I don't think people would like to do it. And if people like to do it, it means, there's a huge question mark. What are we doing?
Can I interject? Government interference or attempts to regulate the industry, if you will, historically in this region, has been through press laws that have provided lists of forbidden issues. And the lists varied, you know, sometimes there were few, sometimes often there were not few. This is how governments have attempted to regulate the business. And if people wrote about forbidden issues, they were thrown in jail. That obviously has not worked, okay, and cannot work in today's environment. What can work, I think, is a combination of, one, the industry itself getting concerned about journalistic ethics and training, and I think the industry itself has the responsibility, because in the end they want to be able to attract qualified people. I remember the tourism industry in this country was suffering for a long time from the lack of qualified people, and until the industry itself got together and contributed to some training institutes for people in the tourism industry. Until that happened, the tourism industry in Jordan continued to suffer. And when it happened, the tourism industry improved a great deal. So the industry has a vested interest in making sure that it upgrades the level of people working in it. But in the end, I agree with Raja. In the end, what will determine whether an outlet, stays there or not is the viewer. Look at this country, because I'm more experienced with Jordan than in other places. We may have 50 weekly, tabloids, and scores of electronic websites in addition, because we're not just talking about TV stations. We're also talking about social media and all the new media that is available. Out of the tabloids, every market poll suggests that maybe 2 or 3 have a readership list of more than 3,000 people. So in the end, the written word is not always the gospel, guys. I mean, just because it's written does not mean people are reading it. And so in the end, if people are pumping money into Al-Manar or Al Jazeera, they can do this for 5 years and maybe for 10 years. But in the end, if there is no viewership, people cannot remain pumping hundreds of millions of dollars for an indefinite period of time without the viewer, deciding what he or she wants to see.
Well, now let me ask you about the role of the state. When we have seen in recent years, you say it didn't work. Draconian measures to regulate the media haven't worked, yet we still see new laws coming out. There's a draft law in the UAE right now that has made a lot of journalists very nervous, because the journalist groups argue that it's trying to control the media, not enable the media. I think it was in 2008, early in 2008, Arab information ministers passed a charter which many journalist groups also saw as restricting the media. From where you sit, Mona, what is your perception of do states in the Middle East get it, and what do they get?
Well, there's this unfortunate point that people are afraid of information, or states are afraid of information. That's why they don't have people meters, because then you'll know exactly what the viewership is, or you'll know exactly how many newspapers were sold. There's always trying to fudge numbers so that it will serve your agenda, unfortunately. The state media is very interesting, because again, I hosted a show, but I'm talking mostly now from an audience point of view, is that when two countries are not in agreement, or they are in agreement, from the news coverage, when are they nice to each other and when are they not nice to each other? And so, I mean, there's all this subtle things that go on in the region. When we talk about regulation and we talk about the laws that the governments are putting out, the problem is that it means a lot of times journalists get imprisoned, or bloggers get imprisoned. It's not just about a law and a court of law. It's actually somebody disappearing for 2-3 months. So you strike fear in the rest of the journalists. In the UAE, a friend of mine went and worked as a journalist, then came back and told us that there's more censorship in the UAE than in Saudi Arabia. That there's more control from the state over what gets published in the state newspapers. Where in Saudi Arabia, as somebody mentioned, it's not just the journalists, but there's a lot of op-eds that people do try to push the envelope. And the fear that if the state regulation comes into effect, not just the lists, but actually become the judge, then it's not going to be about lists, it's just going to be about suddenly somebody writes something and you're not really sure what was wrong, and they disappear. So I'm much more in line with what Mr. Zafar said, that it becomes a general board from the different broadcasters coming in and actually becoming the state regulators rather than giving power to the governments.
I believe the only problem with this, that they will never come together, the different broadcasters, they will never come together because they reflect different political entities which will never come together. And when they will come together, they won't need us, you know. So this is not possible. I believe we have a big problem as a journalist who pretend to belong, that I belong to an independent news organization, and I believe so. I think there are two factors which are pumping viewership to the wrong channels. Factor number one is that our audience are very emotional, and they were trained since they were educated, since they were small young kids, that they should adopt a cause, and they should have an enemy, and the media should be part of their political campaign against the enemy. This is one. The other thing is that during crisis like war in Lebanon in 2006, war in Gaza this year in January, during these crises, audience who are not directly involved in the war itself, who are not suffering of the war itself, behave like a football match spectators. So they have two parties, two teams competing to win. Of course, they are not going to be with the Israeli teams, they are with the Arab team, and they would like to see more and more and more of fighting and competition till this competition ends. The problem is that our audience are educated to look at our blood as it is a football competition. That's why Al Arabiya gained more audience in Gaza during the war for the first time.
But why is it a problem?
The problem.
Who are we to educate the audience of what they should want?
No, we are not in a position to educate the audience of what they should want. But we are news industry. We should tell people news. We are news. We should give news bulletins, not football matches or war matches.
I'd just like to, look viewerships and how do you gain audiences. Let's look at today. Let us just examine what has transpired in the world since September of 2008, and what is on the minds of the people today, right across the world, and more so in this region. Although this region has not, I believe, been impacted as much as obviously this tsunami that has taken place. I was at an earlier session, and that's why I picked up, and one of the participants made a very strong statement, and he said that, look, it's not the central bank regulators, it is not governments, the problem is consumer confidence, and it's all up here in the mind. I think media has a role. I think people are interested. I think if media were to get together, and what is media's role going to be in changing this mindset in the coming year? And this has an impact right across your middle classes and your lower classes. People are concerned whether they'll keep their jobs, whether, what the cost of living would be. And that is perhaps, when I say broadcasters getting together, I see no harm in broadcasters getting together, unless you set aside your political differences. I think, what is our contribution to civil society as far as this region is concerned. And that is where I'm coming from.
I want to turn just briefly to the question again, race for an audience, the title of our panel. I'd like to look at how do officials who want to reach an audience and want to strike reach the hearts and minds of an audience choose certain media to make their message heard, particularly when it's not state-run media. And an interesting example was President Barack Obama's decision to do his first address to the Arab world on Arabiya. And I want to ask Nakhle, but you others as well, what is it about that decision, or let me rephrase that, if Barack Obama was trying to reach the hearts and minds in the Arab world, was it the right decision to choose a channel like Arabiya? Or in a day like today, do we need to be reaching out to the audiences through broadcasters? Should we be going on YouTube instead?
Well, I think President Obama took his decision based on some researches and lots of studies. It's not secret that President Obama is moving strategically to talk more openly and more warmly with the Arab world, and this is not a game. This is a proper strategic policy by President Obama, and to choose the right medium also, it's a strategic decision, because they cannot afford for the president to give for his first ever interview for non-American media without lots of calculation and without making sure that their message will get through. And fortunately for Arabiya was the right medium for this. And it's not only President Obama, even Ahmadinejad, when he wanted to talk to the Arab world, he talks to the Arab world through Al-Arabiya, and many other leaders, when they want to talk to the Arab world, they talk through Al-Arabiya. And I see, as editor of Al-Arabiya, I see that this is really rewarding for the hard work and the long way that my colleagues chose to take for the last 6 years.
Marwan, please.
I'm going to say something provocative.
We need
Most public officials in the Arab world talk to the media through state TV or state press. Most of them. I mean, I'm not talking about the limited interviews they give to. When they want to deliver a message, they do it through state-run media, because they are not challenged, because the questions are framed, and because they can do anything they want. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, most public officials in the Arab world are not good communicators. With the exception of Lebanon, and I will say this, where there is a healthy and competitive media environment, no matter what else you can say about the country. Public officials in Lebanon, if you notice on TV, are good communicators, no matter what their point of view is.
All Lebanese are good communicators.
Well, but most officials, so when you ask the question of what media outlet do public officials in the Arab world use, why is it Al-Arabiya or as opposed to the new social, as opposed to YouTube, for example, we are at a much more basic level in terms of communication with our public. It's still a one-way communication, it's still top-down, and it's still using the state-run TV. And in the few instances where public officials go on channels like Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya, they get irritated if they are asked questions they are not used to, or if they're asked difficult questions. So this whole environment in the Arab world needs to evolve. To get to the point of this new social media, we still have to cross several milestones, in my opinion, that we have not crossed yet in dealing with the media.
Can I add something here?
Everyone's jumping in. Zafar, go ahead. Please.
Yeah, just a short comment. About Al Arabiya. I mean, there are only two news stations other than Al Manar, and obviously they also have their, it's a no-brainer. The President of the United States is not going to appear on Al Jazeera.
Why not? the President of the United States has the biggest military base outside in the world, outside the United States.
We all know
in
that.
Qatar.
Yes, we all know that.
so-
But the whole question is that the messages that sends back to mainstream media in the U.S.
Yeah, he has
so
to, weigh
it's
both
a no-brainer.
constituencies, the Arab world and the U.S. Public.
No, but at the end of the day, if the President of the United States did not get through his message when he appeared on Al-Arabiya, we wouldn't have opened this subject today.
I think
have-
Nakhle is doing a great advertising campaign for Arabiya. I mean, the best TV commercial ever.
No, I didn't mean, there's no disrespect to viewership and standing of Al Arabiya. I meant purely from a positional point of view. You cannot have the United States president appearing on Al Jazeera, and the only option then is.
But why not? I mean, if the idea is you want...
I think
Sorry.
the perception in the U.S. about Al Jazeera is quite clear. I mean, they haven't even got distribution rights as yet from the FCC.
But can I say something? I don't agree, because at the end of the day, Al Jazeera, whether I agree with the political point of view or not, is an international global brand. It's one of the Middle East global brands that could travel to the globe. I mean, if we want to name some brands that went from east to west, Jazeera would be the number one. I mean, Emirates Airlines, Al Jazeera, there are few. So I think if President Obama would like to go through Al Jazeera, he will go through Al Jazeera, but maybe because he wanted a broader, and at the end, we have to look at ratings, because he wants really to reach. He has a message of tolerance that he wanted really to pass. But I just want to go to what Marwan said earlier. Yes, public officials go through TV official stations or state-owned stations, but who is listening to them?
That's what they should know.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what they should know, and they don't.
I think they know, because there are facts and there are news that are related to some of the countries. You cannot read about it, neither in the newspapers nor in the state TVs. But they are not realizing that people are getting it from somewhere else. From New York Times, from Time, from Newsweek, from the internet, all the sites that are available to us every minute of the day. I mean, with our mobile phones, we can get the truth every minute of the day from whatever source we want. They do not decide for us, we decide for ourselves as viewers.
And also the news has changed. I mean, when we're talking about news right now, all of you are really talking about those half-hour news bulletins with the interview of the state. News now is being made through stories, how it reflects. I think that, and this hasn't been reflected in advertisement. We haven't gotten more advertisements for this. But the talk shows that are not about just interviewing mouthpieces. It's about looking at the state of the people. When you talked about the tsunami, I think one of the most effective tsunami broadcast was with Brian Williams, when he went in and actually became very emotional regarding what happened. Also Anderson Cooper, I think, when he went in to somewhere else. When that kind of emotional connection, but you can't have that in the proper news usually. But the other ways that news can be delivered, and agendas, whether they are for the civic society or for certain political agendas, are being circulated.
Caroline,
It's
can
through
I-
that. And there has to but there has to be this awareness that you can always put your point of view in different ways and actually start using that, and let the people decide whether they agree or
One
not.
more brief comment before we take some
But
questions from the audience.
Raja and Mona are pointing out a very important point, is who is watching what in the Arab world. And we both lack from clear statistics on the issue, and we also lack from a lack of awareness even when statistics are present.
بس شواري
There is a tendency to ignore facts on the ground and to behave as if we were operating in an environment of 20 or 30 years ago. I'll give you an example from when I was in charge of state media, Minister of Information. And we were talking in the cabinet about a communication strategy on a certain issue, okay? And you know, everybody, of course, around the cabinet wants it to be on state TV. I said, okay, let me show you the statistics. State TV, the news bulletin in Jordan, which is the highest rated show on Jordanian TV, is watched by 14% of the population. In other words, 86% of the population don't see this. So if you're talking about a communication strategy that is based on Jordan TV, forget it. Do you think anybody, agrees or even acknowledges this? There is a tendency not to acknowledge facts. So we have a problem.
But still, they don't have problem in budget. This is my, as private sector TV, this is my dilemma, that my competitor do not have audience, but they don't have a problem in budget.
I think to address that issue, I think it is very important to the point that Raja made was we've got to go ahead and introduce measurement tools. Without that, I mean, your question on who's watching what will not get answers.
Let's take some questions from the audience. I can hear so many rumblings. We've got a very active, interested audience, I think. We've got some microphones. Raise your hands. Let's just start over here in the front row with this gentleman, and I'll work my way around the room.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be with you, Mr. Rajat Rad. I'm from the communications industry. I've been in the communications industry for more than 14 years. As you mentioned, you have been discussing two channels, Al Jazeera and Arabiya. That means we don't have channels. But I'll tell you the channels we have. We have Mazika, we have Rutana Khalijiya, Rutana Arabiya. We have Melody Channel, Melody Mix, Melody Tunes, Melody Arabiya, Rutana Khalijiya. We've got so many other channels that does nothing for the Arabic audience, but making them spend money on the SMS. Let me tell you figures. You need figures? I'll tell you figures. Do you know how much the Arab youth spend on the SMSing these channels? $5 billion per year. So, yeah, it's statistics. I'll give you the source. So, the Arab audience are looking for content. Our media does not have content. Let's be realistic here. What is the content in the Arabic media? It's either Haifa Wahbe or Noor, which is our friends Turkey from here, the Turkish series, which was, but if you look at the NBC, let's be realistic. NBC Group is the leading TV channels in the Arab world. What does differentiate NBC from others? I'll tell you something, unfortunately, not a lot, because most of your content is from America, especially NBC4, NBC2, NBC1, they have Kalam Naam and a couple of other content, rich content. That's why she proudly said, I did not lose any advertisers. So the problem here, the media to attract audiences, they need to be, first of all, rich in content, develop their own content, and to invest in R&D, research and development, understand what the audience wants. Why? Who want to win the Millionaire has got this much of audience, and NBC made millions out of it with George Khurdahi. He did a great job. But why? Because the content is rich, but unfortunately it's an imported content again. Again, our media is not creative. Let's be realistic. How many of the TV channels in the Arab world has went offline, off air? Let's look at Oprah. Oprah has her own magazine. She has Twitter. Larry King Life, he's on Twitter, he's on blog, and blah, blah, blah. Where is and I don't know who said this, you, and I was so impressed with what you said. You said we need a mix. You're right about this, because we don't have, for example, the Discovery Channel of the Arab world, which is a very high quality channel. The National Geography. How do the Discovery, have you ever seen an advertising campaign on Discovery Channel? Not really. They don't have a lot of commercial breaks. What they do, they document the programs they produce and they sell it to us. So you see a lot of Discovery Channel programs in our TV stations. So that's it. As for the regulations, I don't think we have to wait for our governments. If we wait for our governments, we will not do anything, because our governments will not do anything for us. Okay, and let's be realistic with that. I'll tell you a research I've done in April, last point. I have questioned 100 Arab youth, 2 questions. Do you know your president or your leader strategy for the next 4 years? And the next question, guess what? Do you know Obama's strategy for the next 4 years for America? Most of the answers, except 2 Egyptians, said no for the first one and yes for the second one. We all know what President Obama wants to do for his people in the first 100 days and for the next 4 years. Why? because he's active, he's into media, he's into blog, and we all know that Mr. Obama won his election because of Facebook. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your comment, Mohammed.
So
If I could ask
want
you,
me-
please, sorry.
Sorry.
I was
Because-
just, do you have, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with him. This is what I was trying to communicate, and that's why I said when I said 400 channels, I know that the 400 channels are not all effective, but the only thing I disagree with Mona is not only 8 or 10 channels. I think with the explosive growth in number of channels, music channels, entertainment channels, and what the people want, I agree with you that at the end of the day, content is king. If we do not have content, let's not try to win any future battle, because it's all around content. And as I said, it's the viewer who will decide where to go. And I agree with you. That's why I said the young in Saudi Arabia are spending more time in social media, on social media, than on TV. So this should tell us something, that they want something new, they want fresh air. And I totally agree with you that at the end, if I said it at the beginning and I will close with it, it's a battle for share of mind, share of heart, and share of conviction. If I do not have a share of your mind and heart, I will never be able to communicate with you. So
We'll take a question from this quadrant next. Can we try to keep it to a question instead of a statement? The lady in the back.
Hi, Sarah Lee Whitson from Human Rights Watch. I know you touched on this a bit in your panel, but I'm wondering, what is the media strategy for dealing with the censorship laws in place in virtually every Arab country that make it against the law to do such vague and ill-defined crimes, such as insulting the leader, harming brotherly relations, the UAE's new law harming the economy, where we have countless cases of journalists who have been jailed or sued, subject to hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties for trying to write about the news in their countries. And there's also, of course, this great degree of self-censorship where journalists and especially broadcast stations just basically don't cover certain countries because of their need to maintain good relationships with their host governments or allied governments. How is the media going to deal with these continued obstacles to true reporting?
Zafar.
To answer that question, I think you make a very valid point on self-censorship. I think that is something that has stayed, and it will take time to move forward on that. But I'm happy to report, since we do the stock market, so it's not my problem.
Well, apparently it is my problem because I work in news, and I believe you are absolutely right, and we do need your support in this as a human rights organization. The problem here is that the regulator is the government, and the media is the victim. The judicial system is pro the government, and to be honest, not many of us can refer to the court if we are in trouble. The third thing is that we have really life-threatening action, or in some cases we lost lives in Iraq and in Lebanon and in other parts of the Arab world. We did lose life. We recently, during Gaza war, we had a direct threat from the leader of Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, when he blamed Al-Arabiya for not covering his way and the war his way, and he incited against Al-Arabiya. And at the end of the day, it's easy to take me to the court, but I cannot take the case of this incitement to the court. So we need the audience support in this. We need the governments to be more understanding, and we need the journalists to be more supportive. And obviously, thank you for being with us in this issue.
Marwan.
Well, I think the internet is changing the rules of the game. And therefore, I think that whether the UAE law passes or not, it will be temporary. In other words, people are not just not dumb, but they now have an option. If their local newspapers are not covering things in the way they think is appropriate, they have an option. They switch off and they go elsewhere. They go to satellite TV, they go to the internet. So this notion of the state being able to control what is being fed to people is an archaic notion. Churchill once said that politicians do the right thing after they exhaust all other possibilities. And the problem in the other Arab world sometimes is we've exhausted all other possibilities. We're repeating them now. But in the end, you know, with the age of the internet, where people have options and satellite TV and mobile phones, by the way, because as Raja said, you know, in places in, say, sub-Saharan Africa where the internet is not available but mobile phones are, in such places the proliferation of information is such that the state just cannot keep up with laws that don't belong to the 21st century.
I just want to add one twist. There are two changes also, not just as the eyewitness, is that you have a cell phone and it has a camera, and you can actually post it so that you can show an alternative point of view immediately, and it would reach out to the world. The other thing that I think, and Saudi Arabia is quite concerned with this all the time, because you make a mistake and then the next day it's on the Huffington Post, the fatwa against, you know, something, or that 8-year-old girl, or, you know, and the good news doesn't make it. That's the problem. It's always the negative. But there's also international pressure now when bad things happen and they don't get reaction within that country, that how could this happen? And then you find changes occurring. In the UAE, that there was that a sheikh who, I didn't see the video, but I read about it, and it seems a lot of despicable acts were done, and it was on the internet, and then action was taken. But there's a change also in regulation and also in censorship, that the state can't always go against international opinion. They have to kind of mitigate that. Right?
I think the best thing to do is to invite the statesmen to go and spend some time on blogs, because for us as an agency, whenever we want to design a campaign about something, we always go to the blogs and see the discussion that is taking place, so that we can collect some human insights of what people think of a certain subject, of a topic. And I think this is the most reflective way today to get to know more about the emotions and how people are interacting with all the issues and of today. So maybe the human rights should invite statesmen to really spend some time reading some blogs. This is number one. Number two, to be fair, I mean, I'm not sure, but I heard that the state has said that this law is not going to be applied, or that it was miscommunicated. I'm not sure, so I do not want to bring something confusing to the scene. Maybe you know more, because when it was said that people are going to pay like dearly for bad news about Dubai, then it was said in the media that this was not the case, and there was no law of such nature. I'm not sure. But.
It's still, let's just take one more question over here from this quadrant. Do we have a microphone here as well? Gentleman with the pink tie.
I am Mahmoud Jabari. I'm Palestinian and global change maker. My question to Dr. Marwan. Dr. Marwan, if the governments want to decrease the regulations on media, do you think our media as Arabics is able enough to be trusted by the government to share it, the interest of the country? My second question to Mr. Abdurrahman is, since we are watching the Arabic efforts for the peace process and the Arabic Peace Initiative, what did the Arabic media do, or Al Arabiya, for example, to talk to the Arabic citizens and to tell them about the benefits that this initiative will bring to them in order to decrease the distance between the official efforts and the citizens' life?
Who decides, Muhammad, who to trust and who not to? You know, why do you give this authority to a small number of people who will decide for the general population what is to be trusted and what is not? I am not happy with a lot of things that are happening in the media. I have been the, subject of attacks from so many media outlets in Jordan, but it doesn't give me the right to say you know, you can say this because you agree with me, and you cannot say it because you don't agree with me. This issue of trust is respectfully a notion of the past. I mean, decision making is an issue for the people. There is no question about it. If the level is not the right level, then we can talk about such things as training. We can talk about such things as I said, libel laws, things that regulate it but not censor it. And there's a big difference between regulation and censorship. Regulation is very important in every industry. It's not just in the media industry that we have regulation. But you have to draw a line between what is considered regulation and what is considered censorship. And I think that we are in a transition stage where there is a lot of proliferation, where there is an explosion in the number of media outlets in the Arab world, and certainly in any transition period, you're going to have to deal with challenges. Things don't happen overnight. Democratization doesn't happen overnight. Economic reform does not happen overnight. Why should we assume that the media is going to be trusted and responsible and accurate and objective overnight? It's not going to happen. But if the objective finally is to have a media that informs, monitors, and supervises and investigates, if that is the objective, then we must allow for a transition period during which we have to experiment with some excesses here and there until we get to the point that others in the world got to. But certainly the question, the solution is not by keeping a closed system. It's just burying our heads in the sand. If we think that because we don't like what the media is saying, we should just close it and not deal with it. That is not an option.
Somebody else would say it.
Nakhle, I think Nakhle, you were.
Yeah, thank you for your question about the selling the Arab Media Peace Initiative. I tell you the truth. We are not in a position to do this, and it is not our business to sell the Arab Peace Media Initiative. There are 22 Arab countries who signed on this peace initiative, and it is their job to do so. We welcome any paid advertising spots on Al Arabiya to do this. We welcome this. But in the same time, I should tell you that it is our moral duty to promote peace and to talk positively about peace. This is ethics, this is moralities, and we will always do so. In addition to moralities and ethics, we believe that peace will bring us better business opportunities and less pressures as journalists.
But you can still do it without being paid. It's
No.
a noble cause.
Well, if you can afford it.
The audience behind me here. Please, the gentleman over here in the front row.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the role of the independent political media, which I really did not hear. What we have in the Arab world is really television stations, newspapers, either directly run by the states or indirectly influenced or partly owned by the state. But the role of the independent political opinion, we can only see it now in the blogs. We do not see it in the television stations. With all due respect, what we see in the stations are directed, tainted, something more of a PR. But the independence isn't there really. And even the talk about Al Jazeera, we also had in the 60s something similar to Al Jazeera, Saud al-Arab, one state, very successful at talking to millions of people. But we do not have that independent voice of small groups or companies that are not really affiliated to the states directly or indirectly. Thank you.
You have some. You have LBC of Lebanon, you have Future TV, they are not state-owned. They are privately owned, and they represent maybe a point of view. And on a regional basis, I would say they are independent. Now in Lebanon, each party will have a certain color, as we all know. But I mean, if we take Lebanon as an example, and Marwan referred to it, you will see that there is a major role for independent news or stations, channels, whatever, to be able to pass a point of view that is not necessarily reflective of what the state wants.
Can you give me 20 seconds on this?
20 seconds.
Okay, I believe that media, independent media, is like any other private sector in this part of the world. Private sectors, big private sectors, are unfortunately always protected or linked by somebody in the government. This is part of our corrupt system that we should all face and fight. So why do we want to exclude the media if we are not excluding banks or touristic agencies or any other sector?
Very briefly, I think there are various shades of opinion, and it's reflective. So it comes back if the audience or viewers don't want to watch something. I think it's more in terms of having the right balance and giving both points of view. So if people want to listen to really straightforward news with both points of view, come to CNBC Arabiya.
And you'll regret it.
You have behind some questions.
I just took from this book, so I'm going to work. Well, yeah, I know, but I took one from this board. The lady in the back with the glasses.
Hi. You've all mentioned that the Lebanese case when it comes to media is the best case, and you've mentioned that the Lebanese media is the best not owned state media. Actually, it's not owned by the state because there is no state there. That's why it doesn't make it a better example for the Arab media. Unfortunately,
it's unfair to say this. Carry on. It's unfair, yeah.
I'm Lebanese. That's why I'm saying.
I mean, if you this makes me say more that you are unfair. Carry on.
And I think that there is a leap in this discussion because there is no representative of Al Jazeera, and I'm sure if there was someone of Al Jazeera here, we wouldn't have heard some information we've heard already. I don't know. I mean, I have to be so skeptical when it comes to saying that President Obama chose Al Arabiya because it have a broader audience. I have to be skeptical about that. He chose Al Arabiya because of a political reason, not because of scientifically statistical reason.
Please, your question.
I just have only one question. When we always talk about the media, we talk about either professionalism or freedom of speech. Are they separate exactly? I mean, how can you do professional media without freedom of press, and how can you have freedom of press with no technical professionalism in the journalism? Thank you.
Can I answer, please? I insist, please.
Are we talking about her question?
Yes,
A
yes,
response
of course,
okay.
of course. Yeah. Despite the turbulence that we are living in Lebanon, and despite how you look at the government in Lebanon, but I think you have to remove your hat and say at least democracy is still alive. Democracy is still alive, whether you agree or you disagree with what's happening, but at the end of the day, you can say whatever you want in Lebanon, in newspapers, in TV, in whatever. I mean, the state never interfered. This is number one. And number two, when it comes to, nobody is trying to say anything negative about Jazeera. On the contrary, I said that it is a global brand. Successfully were able to integrate the globe from the Middle East, and it was a very specific situation. And when we talked about Obama deciding to go through Al Arabiya, we said it for two things. Yes, I agree with you that politically it represents more maybe the American direction, but at the same time, and based on facts and figures, Al Arabiya and NBC in general are the most rated or the highest rated TV channels and stations. So I'm not doing any other, you did enough, but I mean.
The question about professionalism and freedom of speech. Professionalism, we talked a little bit earlier about training. Is there a natural tension between professionalism and freedom of speech? Do they have to go hand in hand?
The dominant situation in the region today is either, either state media or state-like media that shies away from talking about taboo subjects and therefore is bland, boring, and nobody is watching it or increasingly not doing so. Or between, you know, other, and I'm not just talking about, again, I hope the discussion is not limited to broadcast stations, because media in the Arab world is way bigger than just Al-Arabiya and Jazeera and MBC, with all due respect. But between another form that tackles taboo issues, but does so in a sensational manner, and without proper checking of facts and without proper, you know, checking with people. Can we hope for a third way in which we tackle taboo subjects but in an objective manner? That is something that we are in transition for. This is something that will not evolve because of an administrative order, because of state regulation or lack of regulation. This is something that will evolve with time as we allow for better training, as we allow for a better culture of information. We are still in transition. We've been under state control for the longest period of time, until maybe the 90s, when state control started being loosened in terms of control of the media. But it's not, you know, we're not at a position where we've migrated from total control to total objectivity while tackling difficult issues. We're still in between. So I once again, you know, hope that we give the process time to mature. It's not there yet, and I think it's unrealistic to expect it to mature in a very short period of time.
I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone have a very short question? Succinct. I'm going to ask somebody else on the panel to choose. Zafar, choose a...
Your prerogative is...
This gentleman back there.
My name is Ali Asghar. I'm with Lazard, which is an investment bank. Mohammed questioned over here why in the region content similar to National Geographic and Discovery is not being developed. This content is very expensive to produce, and satellite and cable PTV, which has been a source of such funding for such content, has been challenged due to free-to-air, piracy, and certain media outlets that spend money on content but have been highly subsidized. For example, Al Jazeera News. What is the panel's view on the future of pay TV in the region? Because, as I said, in the developed markets, they are a major source of such high-quality programming.
Who wants to take a stab at that first? The future of pay TV in the Middle East.
Satellite and cable pay
Zafar,
TV.
do you have any thoughts to start us off?
On satellite and pay TV, it's proved to be a non-commercial venture in this. With so many free-to-air channels, the two pay TV companies, you know, in the region have not performed. And whether it goes back to the time when they first introduced pay TV, where they charged significant amounts for the boxes. So I think we have an issue with pay TV in this region when there are free-to-air channels available.
Let's not forget that the piracy killed pay TV. If you go to places like in Egypt, and we have some figures that would say that 80% is getting it through piracy, the same applies to Lebanon and other countries. So I think this is the biggest challenge for pay TV. And this is why today they're losing ground a little bit compared
There's
to when
also another
first
angle, which is that many of the non-commercial channels in the developed world, some of whom have been mentioned today, operate on public support, philanthropy from public support. A philanthropic culture is not, I don't want to be too harsh, but we don't have the kind of philanthropic culture that exists abroad. And until we do that, this is not going to happen, because it is expensive, as has been pointed out, and somebody has to pay for it. And it's something in the general interest, but we don't have enough people who care about this to put their money and you know, support such projects.
I just want to add two things about this, because this is something that I personally care about. We do have a philanthropic culture, of course. It's just this is not into the arts and civilizational awareness that others are. We don't need an Arabic or Islamic National Geographic. We don't need an Arabic or Islamic Discovery Channel. I think this is one of the things that I would like to see, that investments in it, so that we would have some content on these channels that would reflect, for example, the desert exhibitions, or animals, or Islamic civilization within those channels. We don't need 2 National Geographics in the world. I don't think so. This is something that I think Al Jazeera, some documentary, and Arabiya is also doing some documentary, historical documentaries, but those very expensive, beautiful shows that we see on the History Channel, etc., can be consolidated in a way with Arabic investors or Arabic filmmakers joining them, rather than having separate. And I don't see it, I don't know whether there's any kind of movement in the owners of channels to actually invest in these things. I would like to know if there is, if anybody knows.
Unfortunately, if we go back to research, and in no way I'm any disrespect to the audience, because at the end of the day I said they are in control, but when you see that Noor is the highest by far rated program in the Middle East, across the Middle East, it has to tell you something. At the end,
they have beautiful homes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're running out of time, so I'm going to. Do we have time for one more question? I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap it up here. You can. I think everybody wants the Iraqi journalist, so I'm going to ask the lady from Iraq. Please be brief. One moment.
We can't hear you.
Okay. Yesterday I attended a session about corporate social responsibility, and I believe the media is also part of the private sector, and part of the corporate social responsibility is enhancing mutual understanding and peace in the Middle East. And since we are all talking about the Middle East, I think in Iraq we have very we were and we are in a very critical period where we have pre-Ba'athist, pro-Ba'athist, anti-Ba'athist. We have pro-Sunni, anti-Sunni, pro-Shia, anti-Sunni, anti-Shias. All these emerged just after war and highlighted. And I think in Iraq, people have an identity issue, that we are having identity issue, as well as the view of Iraq from the Middle East is very vague. How Arab people look at Iraqi people and at Iraq as a country is also very vague, because of all these interconnections of pro-Ba'athist, anti-Ba'athist. What I'm saying is, what is the role of the media in gaining Iraq and the people of Iraq's feeling or belonging to their own region? Because we have major threats. It's not only threats, it's that we have different governments with different political, religious agendas, and then we have. And when my father goes, we have just, we're just being pulled to different regions. We are pulled to being pro-Iranian. We are pulled to being pro-this, pro-that. But what is the role of the media in keeping Iraq in track? And what programs could the media do, highlighting, rather than 40 Sunnis were killed, 40 Shias were killed, highlighting, Iraq's identity?
What is the role of the media in reporting Iraq? And Marwan, it seems like everybody wants you to answer the question. So.
Because of his political background.
I don't know why. Look, the role of the media is to inform. That's basically the number one. The role of the media, I don't see the media as carrying sort of, projects on behalf of the government. The media is only a reflection of what is happening in the country. If the country is divided and has problem, that is naturally going to be reflected in the media. I doubt that the media in a divided country like Iraq is going to do much to improve the situation before it is improved on the ground. In communication, everybody knows this slogan, you cannot sell what's not on the shelf. Okay, so first you have to have something on the shelf to sell it. Iraq is going through a very difficult period, it is moving from one system to the other. There are a lot of sectarian issues, a lot of political issues that have not been decided yet, and I doubt that the media is going to in any way other than to inform on what is going on. I doubt that it is going to do anything beyond that at this point.
Can I just add a little bit? Because this is something we had to tackle when we were doing Kalam Nawam. It was kind of hands-off. One, because of we don't know what to report. The other thing, the political affiliations. You don't know which part of your audience are you going to offend if you carry on something that is not about humanitarian aid, so helping a child who was burnt through something, or a family that lost, children. So Iraq presents a very difficult situation to report, and the problem is that a lot of people in the media like me were not trained to know how to tackle it. So what happens is that we pull away. It's just, it'll take too much thinking to actually do something substantial. And also the difficulty of getting to Iraq. I remember we had one case of a journalist from NBC whose child had a problem in Iraq, and we reported on it. And then when we wanted to do a follow-up, there was no way we can actually get the right information. So there's a lot of things that are happening, but Iraq is, and you don't like emotions.
No,
I like emotions.
We really managed to have a diverse of coverage about Iraq. We have a weekly business program related to Iraq. We cover Iraq theater, we cover Iraq nightlife, we cover Iraq war, we cover all aspects of Iraq. I think it
in
can
Arabiya,
be possible.
I'm sorry, I haven't seen that show. I'll try to see it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm going to have to wrap it up here. Our time is up. I'm not going to bore you too much by summarizing everything we've said today, so I just want to thank the participants in the panel and thank the audience for joining us today.